Hello, everybody in the chess world. Today we're going to see, well, one of my favorites defenses, which is the Pirc defense. And I wanted to address a particular practical problem that you might face if you play this regularly in tournaments, even in Blitz. So, well, you know, the concept of the Pirc defense will be the same of the King's Indian. You know, in all days, the classical 9th and 18th century, you will usually use C, E4, E5, D4, D5, you know, always both sides trying to occupy the center. So, as it's pretty known, but King's Indian and Pirc defense, the idea is I won't occupy the center, I will attack it, I let white occupy the center, and then that will create weaknesses because the pawns cannot go back, and I'll try to attack that. So, one practical problem that we often see is, well, what happens when white plays pretty passively and they don't take that much space, or they place the pieces in kind of passive squares, passive in comparison with the most trendy lines against a Pirc defense. And this might not be so easy to play with black, because at some point we are like, okay, both sides kind of playing really tranquil. I mean, yeah, white may not be playing the most sound variation, but what to do against it, right? Because it won't be so often that you see that. Even sometimes with a weaker players, but you might feel a little bit ashamed. It's like this weaker player doesn't know the theory, so he's playing like natural passive moves, but what to do? So you'll see that there are a lot of fun lines because, well, let us begin with this possibility, right? Let us play this Pirc like this. We'll have in here. So a lot of players start here by h3, like immediately preventing any bishop on g4, or in the future lines, any knight on f6, knight on g4, just controlling the g4 square. So knight on f6, hitting the e-pawn, and bishop d3. I've seen this quite often instead of the most logical knight on c3. And here normally I play castles, and after castles I go knight b on d7, which of course is a good move, but initially it doesn't seem like I'm trying to, punish white for playing a little bit passively. Of course, white did nothing wrong here, it's just not the main line. But there's a detail here, because, well, it's very normal for white here, and this I've seen in a lot of games, to develop this dark square bishop, either to e3 or to g5, to then follow it up with knight bd2. They don't want to play knight bd2 immediately, blocking that bishop. This is possible. You can play, I don't know, follow it up with rook e1, knight f1, then move the bishop. But really natural actually is here to play either, again, bishop on e3 or bishop on g5. And I want to see first bishop on e3. I played this in a rapid club game really recently. And yeah, already here I felt that my opponent, which is not so strong, might fall into a known trick. So I started with e5, another justification for knight b on d7, and I knew white will play c3. This is a typical setup for white. White is just trying to play it as solid as possible, just keeping up really strong center, and then of course they'll go on with knight bd2. But I knew he will probably not know this reaction because, well, black already played d6, so one of the least expected move is now d5. This is the strongest move by far. And, well, the main idea is actually the blunder that my opponent played. It was a rapid game, but of course the main blunder here is if you take here, as in the game, I just play e4 and win immediately with the fourchette. However, let us see some alternatives to realize that black has already basically equalized here. Because, well, I mean, if you play d takes e5, of course the idea is knight takes on e4, and now e5 is under fire and you don't have f4 with white. You might try to create some chaos with bishop takes on e4. You're giving your good bishop, the pair of bishops. Not satisfactory for white at all. You could take on e5 with a knight, but okay, we can just exchange there and play knight takes on e4. Okay, now you do have f4, This is possible, but we can react immediately with f6. Again, this is much more dynamic. This is much more my kind of position, mostly if I want to win. And decent try for white will be okay. They will give up the bishop, but in exchange they get this check, and then rook d1. It's a nice try, but hey, queen on e7. I don't know, pawn takes. I think computer was just, I mean, bishop takes f6 that's the most logical move. This is probably equal. I'm pretty sure the computer was giving me equality here, and it does look good actually for black. Again, I have more development, more open lines. Let us check again after d5. What else? Bishop on g5. Okay, you're recognizing the loss of a tempo with white because you just played bishop on e3, but it's a good move. We can just exchange everything in the center and leave white with this isolated pawn in here. Black has no problems. I think that the most solid attempt is just, well, knight b2. Let us just develop another piece, and be solid on the center, defend on e4. We can, I think, once again exchange everything just to leave white with a isolated pawn on d4. And for example, rook e8. We develop and win the tempo, and after bishop on d3, we can play knight on b6. We're gonna take this d5 square is already ours. No c or e pawns for white to control that square. We're totally fine. So a good detail about this. Okay, I want to show you just a little thing. I used to play the Philidor, so this trick reminded me to this line of the Philidor, which goes like this: e4 d6, d4 knight f6. And in here, instead of the most normal knight on c3, a lot of players play bishop on d3. Well, and after e5, c3, well, it's the same thing. In here, I used to play this d5, which is the main theoretical move and one of the favorite moves for the computer. So I think it's interesting to know this sort of tricks, because from a position in which it seems like you're just playing Pirc, super passive, you can go active pretty quickly. And I want to show you two more games, because let us go back to the first game we saw, right? It was like this: h3, knight f6. We went with bishop d3, castles, knight on bd7. Well, I just show you bishop e3, which was the game that I played. But what if bishop on g5? Because this seems to be an improvement for white, at least against this idea of, e5 kind of followed by d5 in case white decides to play c3. Well, it is an improvement, but in a lot of cases, we can play the same thing with black, and I think that the difference will be a microscopic improvement for white. Let us say like this: I do play e5, and after c3, well, h6. And I think you see where I'm going. Now I'm going to recommend bishop on h4 for white, because if white goes back, again, we have this e5. And I said that this will be just microscopically better for white, to the other line. Well, it is, because it's basically the same, but in here, white, again, should play knight bd2. And let me show you what I meant by that microscopic difference. If I play with black the same, and I think I would, exchange everything and leave black with this isolated d-pawn, develop the rook and win a tempo. This is all the same. And knight b6. Remember, this is the same line. Well, since my pawn is on h6 instead of on h7, well, now queen d2 hits h6. So yeah. And yeah, we'll probably have to lose another tempo by playing king on h7. We have alternatives. Okay, just slight improvement for white, but this is totally playable. And again, I think that black has equalized out of the opening. Going back, so this h6, well, then let us recommend instead bishop on h4 for white. So this will be a different game. Of course, this is all playable, but okay, I might be biased by this line of e5 on d5, but this is the reason why I will recommend bishop on h4 with white. And I have a last example that to me was quite nice, because this happened on a real game. So we're going to see another way of playing passively with white against the burst. So let us go back to e4, g6, g4, bishop g7, knight f3, g6. So we've been looking at h3. But in one game, my opponent played bishop on e3 immediately. So, well, knight f6, the Pirc's move, and hitting the e4 pawn. Knight bd2, so not knight on c3 or bishop on d3. Maybe in a way like the most passive one, like why would white show his cards so early, playing, defending the e4 pawn with the most passive way? Well, just because it is possible. And again, a lot of players that are not so strong, they do that. They say, well, I don't know theory, I'll just play normal, and I won't lash out in the center or in the flanks. I won't give the Pirc player what he wants. That's a little bit of the idea. And it's not so easy because, okay, h3 hasn't been played. This is an important detail, but I wouldn't play knight g4 right now. I think it will be a little bit premature, just bishop on g5. So again, normal chess, castles. Bishop on e2 was the move by white. Again, like the most passive one, like developing a piece, not even on c4. Probably bishop on e2 is better than bishop on c4. But you know what I mean? Look at white's pieces. Like, what are they doing? Well, they're asking me what to do with my Pirc in a way. It's not a bad idea. And here, this was a long game. And here I thought for 15 minutes. Might be ridiculous, it's move 6. But my first thought was that the most known and logical moves, although good, were not so satisfactory for me. I wanted to win the game. Remember, it was a weaker player. He has less rating, so even a draw, I will lose a lot of points. It is typical. So I thought, okay, I know that knight c6, that move exists, because after d5, well, we do have the typical option of going knight b8 back, and then knight b on d7, and then trying to play c6 on e6. I also knew that knight on e5 exists, because it seems awful, but the thing is, after this exchange, well, quite often black will continue with queen on d6, really quickly playing c6 or e6. Yeah, to play against this pawn, this is playable. I didn't like that for this game, actually. Another alternative, let me think, because knight bd7, of course, as in the last game. Well, yeah, it's a normal move, and I can even aim for playing e5 and d5. Well, c4 was kind of a reason that convinced me not to play knight bd7, because now white has forced me to transpose into an all-Indian defense, in which black is fine. Again, not my cup of tea for that game, and nothing to do with... I don't usually play all-Indian defense. So I kept thinking, I was like, well, what to play? I even considered this b6. This exists in a lot of Pircs and modern defenses. It's playable. Castle, c5, c3 playing this. What can I say? Once again, not my cup of tea. But the main thing is, I actually found what I consider the most active move in this position. And I had not prepared this. This is funny. So it kind of confirms how much I like the Pircs, because I wasn't expecting to find an objectively good move that it was also quite aggressive. Because after some thought, I realized that I could play c5. And this is a very interesting pawn sacrifice, and definitely the most possible active move for black, right? So I played c5. And, well, my opponent took the pawn. Of course, white can always answer c5 with a logical c3, of course. And this is, I was kind of expecting this. I'm not sure what I was going to play. Maybe some knight c6, maybe some... I'm not sure. I don't remember. But I know the computer told me just to take and then play d5. Interesting, right? After e5, yeah, this is a thing. We're going to take advantage of the fact that h3 hasn't been played. So, yeah, we were kind of losing a tempo with the knight, but now we're hitting the bishop. So, bishop on f4. And since obviously white now is ready to play h3, kicking out with our knight, well, the typical pawn break, as we saw in our lines, is interesting. f6. Now, it wouldn't be good for white to play h6 because h3, because we can always play intermediate f takes e5, hitting the bishop. So this knight on g4 is played. So, well, a white could take it, and pawn takes is interesting. I think computer was recommending take with the knight, keep this e-pawn, put the knight away out of any danger, and keep the f-file open, mostly with, this bishop right here. Now, this rook is actually looking at the bishop. And let us say castles, I don't know, knight c6. This was roughly equal. Let us see the game, because my opponent played pretty well. He did this a possible move, and definitely accepting the gambit and kind of like calling black's bluff. Well, it wasn't a bluff. What was my idea in here? Can you find it? You can pause the video and think. Knight g4 was the idea. So you can see now there is the kind of chaos that a Pirc player will like. So now I am hitting this bishop, which will ruin the pawn chain. I open up the diagonal of the bishop, which wants to take on b2 and then hit the rook. And well, if this bishop decides to go away, I will simply be able to recapture d takes e5. And well, to finish, I'll show you both how the game continue and what were the alternatives. Because initially my opponent, again, a weak player, bishop f4 exclam. I mean, he decides to, now he took the pawn before, but now he decides to give it back, and it's totally correct. So obviously what I had seen is that if he had taken on d6, like saying, okay, I'll be sure to be a pawn up, of course, knight takes on e3. And I saw during the game, I had seen calculated that f takes e3 is the move, because after d takes on e7, again, going in greedy mode for white, I take on g2 check, king f1, queen takes e7, and after king takes g2, I can even take here and then go back. And I love this position. I gotta admit, there was one detail that I missed that the computer showed me. It's pretty cool. Going back in this same line, let us go back in here. In this position, I think the computer thought that it was, instead of queen and takes e7, the only move I calculated, to me was a pretty straightforward line. I think the computer was kind of like it to add this move, like saying, okay, I'll give you the tempo, but I'll ruin the pawn chain around the king. And I didn't see this during the game, as it's quite interesting. So, but okay, both lines were clear advantage for me. So going back from this position, we were looking at c takes d, knight takes e3, f takes e3 should be better. And of course, queen takes d6. Well, who could argue that I already have compensation for a pawn, right? So because of all of this, going back after knight on g4, my opponent played the correct bishop on f4. And, okay, I play a pawn takes. This is the thing. Well, now I can just recover the pawn. I still have created the chaos and the activity for the pieces. And I like this position. Again, I think my opponent played the best move, h3. In case of normal castles, I think I can totally afford to take on b2 and after rook b1 just going back and then keep playing the game, We might argue if that's good or not for black, but I think it was fine. I would have definitely done it. So h3 was better. That's what he played. Sorry, I'm going here, h3. I went back to f6. Here my opponent played castles. I was also glancing at e5 and knight on d5. And after bishop g3 or h2, let us say bishop g3, just knight c6 and castles. When I asked the computer about this position, it told me that it was basically the same evaluation. It's roughly equal. This is fine. So going back here, instead of e5, my opponent went castles. So knight c6, really logical move. Now my opponent plays e3. Probably not the most precise move, but understandable. They want to forget about the possibility of my bishop hitting here and my knight going to d4. I'm not even sure that this is a bad move. It looks kind of funny, like this d3 now is kind of like a hole. And here I play knight on h5. I don't know if this was really a good move or not, but it seems like that bishop might have some problems because, there was a particular idea. My opponent played bishop e3. I think bishop e3 is the best move. But my idea was that if bishop on h2, I had this bishop on h6. Just, just having a grip on that f4 square. And I think really this again looked quite good for me. I really like this position. I don't see how white will protect f4. You cannot play g3 because of bishop takes h3 and stuff like that. So I think, once again, my opponent was playing quite good because he won he made the good move with the bishop, and he's also looking at the c5 pawn. And just the last moves that I'm going to show you a few more moves in this game, because I play queen c7, and this is what I really like when you find something by yourself. I was able to continue in gambit spirit, like saying, well, now you can just go ahead and take my c5 pawn. Knight on f4 is my main idea, and I think it's worth a pawn. I think it was objectively correct. He took it, and when I went to f4, he went back. I just developed bishop on d7. And again, I haven't opened up the engine on this position, but I'm pretty sure that objectively the pawn has some compensation here. I say some. I think it's fully compensated. I'll probably take black here any day, even now. I really like this. But okay, going back in a general terms, you can see now that the Pirc defense is actually quite good, and I was glad about this because I didn't have to prepare this c5 line. I was able to find it by myself, and the reason is that if you know the Pirc defense, you know the different themes that are there. Remember, this all came from, instead of h3, well, against the h3 lines, we have this idea of, well, I'm gonna take out the arrows, but one day playing this e5, and if white plays it too passive, you can also continue with d5, having both central pawns executed, which is normally at least equal. And after bishop on e3, well, you see this thing. I could have played knight b7 here, or any normal move, and I could, you just wait it out, just level the pieces and work on the advantage later on. But again, having knight g4 available, well, this c5 was... I was so happy in the game when I found this. Instead of going for something that would allow white to play really, really like a rock, well, this e5 is already shaking the tree. Of course, well, to me, it would have been more natural for my opponent to continue with c3, keeping up that spirit of not allowing too much for black. But, well, as I show you, when the computer said that I could take and play d5, and again, looking for activity, this is quite interesting. So, well, I promise I won't make too many more videos about the Pirc and more on defense, because these are my favorite openings. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but okay, I'm trying to foster you, of course, into liking it. And these lines really are some things that convince myself to keep playing this opening. So as usual, I'll leave Citronetta to ask you to like, comment, share, subscribe, and for the video if you like it. And thanks a lot. I will see you next time.